Alright, how's it going, everyone? Thank you for joining me on a new episode of the Music Reviewer Podcast. My name's Josh, and welcome to a new album review we're doing. This is going to be episode 48. The name of the album is Collapsed in Sunbeams. The artist is Arlo Parks, the young, new, fresh, soul influence indie pop / alt R&B / bedroom pop artist from the UK. I've noticed her music spin around, on like indie radio, indie playlist rotation for, the past year or two now at this point. And she released her debut album recently on January 29th. So yeah, been looking forward to covering this. We will get into that here shortly, but before we start, I just want to let everyone know, last album review was actually Foo Fighters' Medicine to Midnight. I thought that was a pretty standard album by the band, but still there's some highlights in there, especially if you're interested in the band in general. I think it's worth a listen, so check out that album in general, but also the review if you have some time. You can listen to it on basically any streaming service with podcasts or YouTube as well. Also, a new episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week dropped this past weekend for the week of February 20th. If you're into Best and Worst Track of the Week, or if you don't know Best and Worst Track of the Week, it's just a weekly show I do where I cover the new entries into the Billboard Hot 100, and I take one that's the worst, take one that's the best, and grade them, the rest of the tracks with a letter grade. This past week was Pooh Shiesty versus Dan and Shay. Pooh ended up getting best track. Dan and Shay, not surprisingly, got worst. But I also have covered some tracks from several other artists. It was a bit of a lengthier lineup. Some tracks from Jason Derulo, did a collab with Adam Levine. Coi Leray, this new up-and-coming rap artist, I guess. Ava Max. G-Eazy and Chris Brown, their latest track, Polo G, and the new Cardi B track. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, please check out that latest episode, Best Orange Track of the Week. You can stream it anywhere the podcast is on as well. And shortly after this episode, you'll also find probably another new episode of Best Orange Track of the Week for this week. But anyways, yeah, let's go ahead and get into this review. Like I said, the artist is Arlo Parks. She's a British singer-songwriter and also poet, if you're going off of Wikipedia. Her debut album, this one, Collapsed in Sunbeams, since its release has peaked at number 3 on the UK album chart. So it seems like she's certainly making a statement for herself, especially on the UK side of things, that her music is certainly gaining traction, a bigger audience, more relevance. I'd say if I had to guess, I'm guessing she's better known in the UK, but she's certainly no secret here in the United States. Some background in her, interestingly, she's of Nigerian descent, but her mother is also French, where growing up she actually learned how to speak French before English. So that's pretty interesting. Arlo's music journey to where she actually found herself gaining traction or some sort of a big break started around 2018 after she submitted demos to British Broadcasting Corporation's Music Introducing, which I'm guessing is a way for up-and-coming UK artists to find a bigger platform if they're lucky enough. And in her case, the demos caught the attention of a British Broadcasting Corporation DJ that forwarded the demos allegedly to some sort of artist development dude that later ended up being her manager. And it seems like since then, it was kind of just she hit the ground running, because in November 2018, she released her debut single, Cola, which ended up being quite a breakout for her. It amassed 3 million streams on Spotify. And then the next year following, she released her debut EP in April 2019, Super Sad Generation, which was also precursed by several other singles that were released by her earlier that year. And the EP overall, honestly, I did not really listen to much of Arlo's music purposefully until I decided to review this album. But as I was listening to this album, I quickly realized that I was more familiar with their music than I realized, mainly due to me listening to just like the generic indie shit that's just thrown on stuff like XMU on my day-to-day basis. So I was already familiar with some of her songs like Eugene and Caroline, I believe, off of this new album. But I never really listened to, for some reason, any of her earlier work, especially what was found on Super Sad Generation. So I went ahead and got a taste of that for this review. And there are some pretty moments on this EP, especially the second track, title track, Super Sad Generation. We find on that track there's a nice moment when the chorus smoothly enters and transitions from the verse. But the EP also had other tracks like Romantic Garbage that were sort of a left turn with its massive sub bass saturation. And overall, the track is a curveball in comparison to Arlo's limited discography overall, even with respect to Collapsed and Sunbeams, more ambient tracks. And the EP definitely demonstrates like typical bedroom pop aesthetics, especially in tracks like I Like. The EP can definitely feel like a sampler to what would come in her debut, as the debut kind of just refines and develops the best attribute of what Arlo was already bringing to her indie pop or bedroom pop genre, take. And I can say her strengths, like her lyrics and her smooth vocal tone, are really taken to another level on this new album, Collapsed in Sunbeams. You can immediately hear that on the opening track, Hurt, which is, prior to that track, the track does open up with a nice little poem over some ambient synthy music, but it is quite short. But I will say the first track really is Hurt. This track overall just has a lovely full sound to it. The supporting instrumentation really does a great job supporting her vocal performance and not getting too in the way of her performance overall, but also giving the track a nice life and color. Stuff like the soft brass textures really exemplify that. The main bass groove on this track is fun and does a great job at structuring other parts of the tracks. I will say this album does have a lot of that going on, some bass highlights, some excellent drum work with a lot of feel. The next track, Too Good. Another really cool track with a fat and prominent bass line, a nice scratchy guitar riff that colors the track quite well. And then some nice moments like the pause and transition to the chorus. I will say in a lot of tracks, she's quite good at bringing anticipation to her choruses or certain moments in the music. And this track does that quite well. This track also has a fun and poppy flavor to it but still with some sophistication. A fun 90s R&B like bounce to it as well. I will say maybe like loosely related to like a beat like Return of the Mac by Mark Morrison. And then a nice organ and keyboard textures that fill out the track quite nicely as well. Thus far, the album's going quite well. And we get another great track after that, Hope, where I will say we kind of get a taste of like maybe some influences. We start delving into like some Amy Winehouse like R&B aesthetics here. I will say she's a direct comparison. I kind of got the same vibe on the Benny album. Really, there's some similarities to her as well to Benny. The track also features a smooth drum, hi-hat based groove, and another fat, smooth bass line just supports everything and brings the sound out quite well. And also there's a very loungy feel. Like I said, going back to Amy Winehouse, she was excellent at doing that kind of thing. And the track also sounds kind of like a throwback, but not outdated. It's kind of weird. Like, it makes me feel nostalgic in the sense that I feel like I'm listening to Amy Winehouse, but it just sounds not quite of the time. Like, at this moment presently, a lot of the music that's being made. So I don't know if Arlo is really doing something that's maybe ahead of the curve, or it just doesn't really fit into anything in particular right now. But it's a great track. There's a nice dreamy bridge section. The chorus is quite catchy as well. I like the melodic, isolated guitar passages as well. Favorite song thus far on the album, but we get another great track after this, Caroline. This track does stick out a bit with the plucked guitar intro. A bit Radiohead influenced in my opinion, almost in Rainbows-like on that guitar tone, or I guess playing style. And it's like a track like this that really makes me come to realize I've heard Arlo's music for quite some time. I just didn't realize it was this particular artist and that she would be dropping an album so soon into the year that I'd be reviewing. But that's beside the point. Another killer drum groove on this track, played with tons of feel. Loving the muddy nature on the bass tone on this track as well. The bass still comes through at times, but it's not distracting at all when it does, so I think that's a perfect balance. Lovely vocal harmonies on the chorus that really grant the track a lush sound. In my opinion, this is the best track thus far, actually. But we do hit a slight slump on the next track, Black Dog. It's certainly not a bad track. But the track kind of has a bit of a slow burner, I guess, nature to it in comparison to the other tracks on the album thus far. Maybe it has an issue with being a bit static. But there is an interesting nature to this track. There's some drab color and aesthetic that we might get from artists like King Cruel or Cosmo Pike. Not a direct comparison though, and there is a interesting dry texture that is thrown on the guitar that's used constantly on this track. So just a track that kind of sticks out a bit. Not really bad, I'd say, but different. We do get another highlight, I'd say. The next track, Green Eyes. Immediately when I hear this track, I love the mysterious nature of the chord progression, guided by the guitar here. There's an energetic but not overbearing drum track that's quite interesting as well in the context of this whole sound. Another really pretty plucked guitar riff that's on this track. Honestly, there's some sort of resemblance thus far. I mentioned earlier to the artist Benny. In my opinion, this track kind of brings that again. She's certainly not as poppy or like straightforward, but the track kind of just feels maybe a slightly more sophisticated overall in most facets to a typical Benny track. But the vocal style and just like the tone and songwriting style and the obvious bedroom pop aesthetics really match these artists up quite similarly. Next track, Just Goes, a bit of a curveball. It's more upbeat right off the bat. I love the rich piano that's on this track. It gives the track a lot looser feel in comparison to the rest of the album. But it has a fun vibe to it, even though the track is about like cheating, I think. I will say the track does feel a bit filler though, not as strong as other tracks. The lighter nature doesn't really bring out the best in Arlo, I think. But I won't counter out in the future for making more lighter and upbeat tracks. I just think this track didn't execute it as best as it could have been. Didn't really care too much of the song For Violet. It's one of the more ambient tracks. But I won't say it's much of a highlight. I will say though, after that track, we do get probably one of the better tracks on this album overall, Eugene. This is the big heavy hitter on like the indie radio playlists, blogosphere type stuff. Heard this track several times, just here and there. I love the ambience of this track. Another killer drum groove that structures this track overall. Tons of feel on there. I love the whispering vocal performance on here, that has the soft texture in Arlo's voice. The soaring synths on the chorus that color the track quite nicely. And what I will say is really interesting about this track is a lot of the lyrical content, it's kind of explaining some sort of complicated relationship. And there's a lot of anger in that performance on this track. And what's cool about this is earlier I mentioned she has the whispering vocal performance with that soft texture on her voice. For some reason, she's able to really translate that to still making it clear that she's, portraying some sort of anger or disdain quite clearly. It's really interesting how she pulls that off, because usually when artists want to, go about, evoking that emotion or portraying that emotion, there's some grunting or belting involved, or some more obvious way to pull it off. I will say, Arlo does it in a very unique way, and I think that's maybe an attribute that would make her quite unique, or even, above, a cut above other artists. So it's a nice track overall. Bluish, the next track, I thought it was an okay track. We kind of return to some of the more smooth 90s and 2000s R&B aesthetics. I love how sensitively the bass is applied on many moments on this track. It's quite excellently executed. But I will say the next track after that, the end track, Portra 400, is a more obvious highlight. I love the bright piano embellishment on this track. A killer smooth and swift drum performance on here overall. I will say the drums on this album, for the most part, are just excellent track to track. And then another killer bass track with tons of sensitivity on that bass line. A nice sample usage here with some of like the more synthy parts that really textured the track quite well. It's an interesting closing track. I liked it, and I think it kind of closes off the album. It's being quite solid for a debut for this young artist, Arlo Parks. We'll be interested for sure any next projects overall for Arlo. Earlier, something I wanted to mention too is that she actually was on a track with Glass Animals, or maybe a remix or later cut of Tangerine. If anyone's interested, maybe go hear that track. She's on there. Something I just discovered. Doesn't really matter in the context of this review, but it's, I guess, kind of saying something that she's already being featured on tracks like Tangerine from bands like Glass Animals. I wouldn't be surprised if you see her name thrown in other various projects overall now. And overall, yeah, consistent, a solid debut album, track to track. There's just a lot of good things to take from each song. There are some lower, dull moments, but that doesn't really happen enough to where I'd say it brings down the album too much. I'd say overall, maybe in the future, I'd like to hear her lean maybe more on that Amy Winehouse style aesthetic. I think she really shines on that sort of thing. But I think eventually she's talented and, I guess, fresh enough to eventually delve away from her obvious influences and kind of just create her own sound, her own unique sound. She certainly has some unique attributes that she can pull off that I don't think many other artists can. So in that respect, features bright from her. But I do think overall the album is a 7 out of 10. If you dig any sort of neo-soul, bedroom pop, all R&B, you might have some really nice things to take away from this album overall. It's a really nice listening experience. It's pretty easy listening, if you will. But other than that, I don't know. I can't really see maybe like the average indie pop fan, unless they're really into that bedroom pop style, being into this. But that's just me. That's just my opinion. This may be the start of maybe like a bigger thing in this genre, and everyone will start wanting to sound like Arlo Parks. I don't know. But like I said, good album. Glad I reviewed it. Would recommend pretty much anyone to check it out. But yeah, if you stuck with me to the end of this review, thanks for listening to this album review. Appreciate you guys. Also be on the lookout for more album reviews in the future. Don't really know what's next. I was thinking Django as I have that written, but I don't know if I want to go into that too soon either. So if there's any recommendations ever, can't promise I'll review them or listen to them, but I will give it consideration if you want to leave a comment on YouTube or send a voice message on Anchor. But yeah, like and subscribe if you're digging the podcast. Leave some feedback, good or bad. Subscribe on your preferred listening platform for podcasts. But anyways, take care of yourselves. I'll see y'all.